The following program was previously recorded.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Elizabeth Gilbert has never shied away from vulnerability. The Connecticut native and best-selling author is known for her honest, deeply personal storytelling. Her latest book is no exception. Gilbert's new memoir, All the Way to the River, reflects on love, addiction, grief, and what it means to live fully, even in the face of loss. It's an intimate portrait of her life with her late partner, Rayya Elias, and the journey that changed her forever. She's the author of the international bestseller Eat, Pray, Love, which has been translated into over 30 languages and sold over 12 million copies worldwide. Gilbert has also published many other books, including Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear, The Signature of All Things, and City of Girls. This hour, she joins us to share what she's learned about friendship, love, and a little thing called Earth School. Elizabeth, it's wonderful to have you with us today.
Hi, Catherine. I'm very happy to be with you today. Thanks for that lovely intro.
Well, of course, you gave me the materials to work with, so it's really me thanking you here.
Well, then you're welcome.
And we appreciate that. And so, your memoir, very highly anticipated, All the Way to the River. It was released only a couple days ago. And of course, we're here to talk about the book. But first, we'd love to get an idea. How are you feeling at this moment? Does releasing a book feel as thrilling still with your experience, or is it also as nerve-wracking as it did in your early days?
No, it doesn't feel nerve-wracking or thrilling. And I actually think that's great. I think that's great for me because thrill and nerve-wrackdom are a sort of opposite sides
Right.
of an overstimulated nervous system, response. And both of those feelings are kind of exhausting. It's exhausting to be thrilled and excited, and it's exhausting to be stressed and nervous. And I actually feel really calm about it, and that is pretty wild to me because the book relays some stuff that is the farthest thing in the world from calm and peaceful. And the writing of the book was difficult and challenging. The living of the story and the writing of the story were difficult and challenging with a lot of emotional highs and lows. But once the book is finished, there's a sense I have, which is just like, well, my work's done,
Right.
and now I get to just walk around talking about a thing, which is a lot easier than living through it or writing about it. So I'm feeling gratefully peaceful as of this moment.
Well, I can certainly feel that Zen state, which I'm excited to be in that state of mind to get into your book. And I mentioned it in the intro because I think there's a fun fact that not everyone may know is you were born here in Connecticut. What comes to mind when you return to this state? Does it feel like homecoming or visiting an old chapter of your life? Does it change with each visit? Or it could be the same.
That's such a good question. When I say I'm going home, I mean Connecticut, and what I picture is my parents' Christmas tree farm where I was raised in Litchfield, which they still astonishingly have into their 80s. My parents are in so many ways the opposite of me. They're people who are very grounded in agricultural cycles and very rooted in place. They've lived in that house, if I can do the math, I think it's been 51 years at this point. And I've probably lived in 50 places in the last 20 years. And don't show any signs of fully settling down ever. So, but they don't change. My parents don't change. Their land doesn't change. Their rhythms don't change. The woods where I grew up don't change. There's a smell to the Northwestern Connecticut pine forests that is what is like kind of my Proust's Madeleine. It's like, oh, there's that smell of sort of ferns and moss and pine. It's so familiar to me. So there's a level at which I feel like nothing here has changed. I change all the time because I seem to be a really mutable person, but I kind of like that nothing here changes.
Well, I love that you mentioned Proust because his focus is on so much remembrance and so much of the past, which is what we're here to talk about today. But it's also so much into the future. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of hope, actually. I think the way your storytelling, at least that's what I got out from it.
Good,
And
yay! We're pro hope.
we are
Thanks.
pro hope. We are pro hope, and I mean it's always a good thing, I think, to have. And whether you're thinking about the past or going into the future, and with your speaking of roots and talking about your family hasn't changed much, but you lived in so many different places. I have a very similar experience as well. This is probably Connecticut's probably my 15th place, I think, that
Mm.
I've lived in. And I think about that. I think about locations a lot and how different places impact me throughout my life, both personally and professionally. Do you think your Connecticut roots factor into your writing in any way?
Yeah, I mean, it's less. Well, actually, what I'm feeling right now is that, like, classical New England culture is about not change,
Mm,
and a sort of steadfastness. But where I feel that it plays into my writing is less so necessarily. You know what? Let me amend that. Um, my mother trained me. That was what she felt that her role was. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn when I speak for her, but I think she would agree with this. That her role was to train her child
mm,
to be able to function in a world that is very chaotic. And so she taught me immense discipline. And growing up on a farm taught me immense discipline and a sense of responsibility. If anything, maybe I feel too much responsibility often,
mm,
but I'm grateful for it because it gives me the discipline to be able to write, and that requires farmers' hours
mm,
essentially, and farmers' discipline. Like, nothing's this isn't going to happen unless you do it, and you have to get up. Like, I'm trained to get up early in the morning and to
mm,
work hard like that. And even though I don't work hard the same way that my parents work hard physically and in an agricultural setting, growing up with that background made me amply prepared for the life of an artist,
mm.
because my parents are independent farmers. They worked for themselves, and so do artists. You work for yourself, and so whatever it is that you're creating, no one's going to show up at the office if you don't show up at the office.
Right,
Like, you are the office.
right. No one's going to create that art
And
for you.
nope, it has to get done. Like the goats aren't going to get milked unless you get up at
Mm,
5 o'clock in the morning and milk them. Like the chickens have to be taken care of. Like the vegetables have to be taken care of. And also, my parents are both makers. Like, they're really resourceful, and they make everything that they use. And my mom sewed all of our clothing when we were growing up,
mm,
and they did all the renovations on their own house. And my dad makes his own tools. And so I think that growing up in an ethic where we were very much anchored in, you do this yourself, you do it well, you do it responsibly, nobody else is going to do it for you, and don't ever work for anybody. I
mm.
mean, I think that's also an ethic that I really grew up with, was like, how insufferable it is to work for other people. And if you don't
Right,
want to work for other people, you have to work extra hard,
right.
because it means that you have to find ways to generate, something in the world that you make. And that's what they did very comfortably. And I grew up watching that. And I think it gave me an immense amount of permission so that I never felt anxious or nervous about trying to be a writer, because I had seen people who did their own thing,
Mm.
and who made their own rules. And that was really empowering, I think. And I think that does have something to do with the land where they lived, because it wasn't easy land. Northwestern Connecticut is hilly and rocky,
Mm.
and if you want to pull something out of that land, and there's frosts in June, like, if you're a
Right.
farmer in that land, like you have to make it work. So yeah, I think I am formed by that. very much.
Well, I think it's an amazing. I mean, I think it's amazing to hear you describe that because it's a lot of structure and discipline.
Yeah.
But you and your parents, you were all producing in different ways of creativity. You know, your parents did the farmland, you milked the goats, you make your own clothes, and you created novels, you created storytelling. And for a land of steady habits, I think you have a lot of those steady habits, but you also went beyond because you left, you went and lived your own life. And I wonder how much of that helped you or not carry the weight that you've been carrying, especially with the themes in your memoir, which is what we're here to talk about today, is All the Way to the River. It has a lot of themes that interconnect. You've got grief, you talk about longing, you talk about addiction, friendship. How would you describe this book to someone who hasn't had a chance to pick it up yet?
I would say that it's a forensic exploration of a love story that started as a friendship. This was my best friend, Rayya Elias. And over the course of almost 20 years of knowing each other, we moved through these cycles of different levels of relationship. We started as hairdresser and client, and then we
Mhm.
became social friends, and then we became closer friends, and then we became neighbors, and then we became, muse and artist in both directions. We were deeply inspired by each other, and then we became what I can only call each other's person. And then only very late at the very end of the game, a year and a half before she died, she was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic and liver cancer. And it was the shock of that terminal cancer diagnosis that propelled us to become lovers. And then even within that very short amount of time, we had this huge range of relationship that we were delighted to be with each other and so excited. Even as she was dying, we were so happy and we were so in love. And then Rhea had been was a heroin addict, recovered heroin and cocaine addict who had spent many years off of drugs. But when the pain and the fear of cancer caught up with her, she returned to that in a big way. She had a major, major relapse into extreme active drug addiction. And I was an unhealed codependent enabler who also went to the lowest and most degraded version of myself at the end of her life, turning into somebody who was allowing myself to be treated abusively and who was allowing her to treat herself abusively and who was paying for all the drugs.
Mhm.
Like we soared to the highest heights and we sank to the lowest lows. And then she died, and I was left as somebody who really likes to sort of figure out what the narrative of something is and who spends her life in exploration. I was left with just this sort of infinite question, like, what happened?
Mm.
Like, how did, I almost felt concussed by the time she died because we had had such an intense relationship. And no one would have thought that was coming when we
Mm.
first met. Um, and so the book is an effort for me to using all of the analytical power that I possess and the spiritual perspective that I live in to try to figure out what indeed happened. How did these two people get so far off the rails? And I do think that what makes it, I think, something that people will relate to is I have not I have not witnessed any evidence to support the fact that you are allowed to go through your entire life without enormous crises,
Mm.
and without sort of feeling like the bottom has fallen out of your world, whether it was something you did or something that was done to you. And I think I think it's actually a rite of human passage that all of us will find ourselves in situations where we're just standing there staggered saying, what just happened? I don't understand how this occurred. How did I get here? And so the book is sort of like slowing down that story beat by beat in order to, again, forensically is the word I would
Mm.
use, figure out what indeed happened to the best of my capacity to understand it.
Well, and I wonder if a lot of us sit down to write our own memoirs, that will be the title. What just happened? What happened? And then so
So she could, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've often joked that I think by the age of 40, all of us could write a book called Not Exactly What I Had Planned.
I know. It's so funny because I had a conversation. I'll never forget this conversation because I was in my early 30s and my friend was in her mid to late 20s when we talked about this, where she had this grand plan. She was in grad school. She was gonna do this and at a certain age, and when she gets to this age, she's gonna do that and this. And I didn't. I hope I softened it a little bit, but I did say, girl, I don't know if you're going to do that because now that
Yeah.
you've said it, it might not happen. So
Right.
I've had so many plans in my life that also kind of got derailed, but in the best way possible. And I don't think I would have changed any of it just because you can only plan so far, right? And so I think my memoir would be what just happened, part probably 365, because there's going to be a lot of people before me that's going to be writing that, and many, many people after me that will continue that
Agreed.
inheritance. And so, I'm curious to hear when you sat down to write this memoir, whenever you decided to do that, where were you in your grieving process? And what questions, or did you have any questions that you were hoping to answer for yourself when you're
Mm.
writing about her?
That's a great, great question. Where was I? I was out of the um, cauldron of grief, and anybody who's in grief knows what I mean by that. Like I was out of the boiling water of grief. And I had done a lot of work on myself to help myself. I was 5 years into a recovery program for addiction and 12-step recovery, which itself is such a journey of healing. And also, if there's anything the 12 steps do, is that it makes you answer the question, what happened?
Mm.
And what is my role? Like,
Hmm.
what happened and what is my role in this? And how do I recover? So I had done a lot of that work. I believe it was my beloved friend Cheryl Strayed who said that it's best to write from your healed scars, not from your open wounds.
Mm.
But during the time of a lot of those open wounds, I was also writing. I actually wrote a version of this book. I think of it as like the ancestor of this book. Only a year after Rayya died, I wrote a 90-page novella that was a fictional account of some of the things that happened in that book that I wrote sort of as a ghost story because there was an emotional feeling I was trying to get to. Um, and I gave that book to my literary agent and I said, don't ever show this to anybody. But I want you to have this, just here, I wrote this thing, but I don't want anyone to see it. And she was like,
Mm.
okay. And then I wrote another version of this book a few years later that was prayers and poetry, some of which ended up in this book.
Mm.
And actually some pieces of that novella, some of the writing in there ended up in this book too. It's like I chopped it up and used it for parts when it was time to write this book. But that book was much more emotionally honest, but it still was evading. I felt like I was writing around the story
Mm.
and I was writing about, it was like I was trying to figure out if there was a way to write about the feelings of this story without telling what happened. And I kind of did it, but I felt that it was a little bit emotionally dishonest. And so it was 2 years ago. No, 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago that I finally felt that I had the mandate and I had the courage to sit down and directly say what occurred, not just what it felt like, but what happened. And um, I think that the question I was trying to answer, one of the questions I was trying to answer was who was Rayya? Because the paradoxes that she contained, this was the person who I knew when she was in her sobriety and when she was in sanity and when she was working a program of recovery as an addict in recovery. She was the most grounded person I had ever met. She was the most intensely anchored, foundationally reassuring, safe, honest, and stabilizing presence that I had ever encountered. That's why I fell in love with her. Um, and when the wheels came off and she returned to that more degraded version of herself, she was kind of a monster.
Mm.
And so I had been left with this really, really destabilizing set of questions like, this is the person I thought I knew the best in the entire world. And now I don't know whether I knew that person at all. And the answer to the question was Rayya. the safest, most grounded, most honest, person who possessed the most integrity of anybody I ever met? Or was she a degraded vampire of a drug addict who used and abused everyone she met? The answer was yes. And that's a really complicated thing for a human being to hold because, like many people, I prefer a simpler answer.
Sure.
And I prefer people to be simpler than they are, and we aren't. And I also found in the writing of that book my own darkness, and my own unhealed wounds that caused me to behave in ways that were very far from my integrity. And anybody who's ever dealt with an addict or been an addict, which is all of us, like I don't think there's any of us who are going to go through this world without either dealing with an addict or being one. Um, we know that that's the big mystery. It's like, how can somebody become such a different version of themselves when this substance or behavior is introduced into their system? And it's devastating. It's why the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous calls the disease of alcoholism, and I would extend that to all addictions, heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because it's a disease of the spirit. You're watching somebody become a very degraded version of themselves, which often causes us to become degraded versions of ourselves.
I think one of the things that really jumped out to me is the honesty in the novel and or in the book, and recognizing that we are all very complicated and nothing is black and white, and we are going to continue answering the question, hopefully, who is Rayya, after we come back from a quick break. Our guest today is international best-selling author and Connecticut native Elizabeth Gilbert. Her new memoir, All the Way to the River, is available now, and she'll be appearing at the Warner Theater in Torrington on September 19th. After the break, we talk Earth School, addiction, and why we love the way we love. Stick with us.
You're listening to a broadcast of a previously recorded program.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Best-selling author Elizabeth Gilbert's memoir, All the Way to the River, chronicles her profound relationship with late partner Rayya Elias. Gilbert is a Connecticut native and joins us today. So, Liz, we kind of ended the last segment talking about Rayya, answering some questions and going deep. And I think we're often drawn to people who have traits that we ourselves wish we possessed or are better at. Did that factor into your relationship with Rayya? I know you touched on a little bit earlier. What do you think she possessed that maybe you wanted more, or vice versa?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was what drew us because we were so dissimilar in so many ways. I'm like a nerd and an academic and a perennial, constantly trying to be a good girl, a people pleaser, obedient, fearful of people. And Rayya was apparently, and I found out that she had deep hidden fears, but she presented as pretty close to fearless. And the thing that she was, she was a recovered drug addict. She was a rock star. She was a musician. She'd been raised in Detroit and kind of forged on the Lower East Side of New York City. She was tough. She'd been in jail. She'd been living on the streets, and she was a survivor. And where her fearlessness, and I actually think this part was genuine in her. She was absolutely unafraid to sail her ship straight into the teeth of any conflict with a person, and she was absolutely unafraid of the truth. And so if there was an issue going on between her and another human being, she would just directly go right into the middle of it. She would just walk into the arena with anyone and be like, all right, dude, what's up? I'm feeling an energy shift. I can tell you're pissed at me. Tell me what I did. Let's talk about this. Let's bring it out in the open. And that's the scariest thing in the entire world for me. The scariest possible thing in the entire world for me is that. And she did it unblinkingly and unwaveringly. And I admired that so much. And she was sort of a teacher for me in that over the years. I would watch her in these interactions with people that just looked terrifying to me. And I don't think her pulse ever even raised in those conversations. And when she said to you, tell me the truth, I would rather hear the truth. I know what it is than not. She meant it. And I don't know many people who really mean it when they say that. She really meant it. And she used to say, the truth has legs. It's the only thing that's going to be left standing in the room when all the nonsense and all the chaos and all the distractions have blown up. So since we're going to end up there, let's start with it. Like, just lay it on the table. I found that just astonishing. It's not how I've ever operated in the world. And what she saw in me that she had so much trouble with and felt so much fear around was that I'm kind of close to fearless creatively. There's a level at which I will attempt anything. I'll make art. I'll write poetry. I'll try to write music. I'll make books. I'll put anything out there in the world. I'm super free as a creator, and a lot of that is due to the way that I was raised, watching people be very free that way. And she didn't have that. She was deeply insecure as an artist and terrified of being seen and terrified of being exposed as not good enough. And so I coached her through a lot of that. I wrote my entire book, Big Magic, for her. The book is dedicated to Rayya, and because I wanted to sort of teach her, like, there's a way to create without fear, and she wanted to teach me there's a way to interact with people without fear. So that was when we were both firing on all cylinders. When we were both at the, everyone's got things in life that are easy for them, and everything's got things in life that are difficult for them. And when we were both in our ease, we had so much to offer the other person. And that was what our love story was based on.
Well, it also sounds like there's a lot of truth and honesty in different ways throughout your relationship. And just by what you have described, what she was able to teach you or show you is to get to the truth, because she doesn't want that to linger. And I know you mentioned in your own storytelling that truth is a place for safety, or seeing truth as a place for safety. Is that something that she helps you get to? Because I think we also don't often hear truth being a safe space, just from the perspective of truth is hard oftentimes.
It's the only safe space. And she did teach me that, and then I've had a lot of learning about that in the years since she died, that I found my own way to. And that has come in my own experience through. I'll just share that there's a repetition pattern that I've had in my life where I start to become very unraveled in a relationship with somebody. And I become more and more anxious and more disturbed. Typically, my way of dealing with that is to just continue to people please my way into total oblivion. Like, there's something that's not right about this relationship, but I'm just going to double down on, mothering, martyring, managing, manipulating, like everything that I have to do. Like, that's how I was. That's how I came up. That's how I was trained to handle people. But I'm getting farther and farther away from myself in that relationship. And then I get to this point where I feel like I'm going to die. And I think it's probably because I've drifted so very far from truth. And those moments, what always happens, but only 100% of the time, is that I suddenly reach a fork in the road where it's like, this is killing me, or I just have to tell the truth. And then when I tell the truth, my safety returns. And often those truths are so scary. And it's the last thing I want to do. Like, the last thing I want to do is open up my mouth and say the thing. But once I say the thing, safety has been restored. And I also have come to learn that the sooner I can get to that with another person, it's actually safer for them too. My friend, the scholar Martha Beck, has wrote a whole book about integrity. And in that book, she said that when you tell the truth to somebody, you restore them to reality as well. You're giving them their reality back. And so she believes there's no such thing as an unkind truth, because it offers somebody the opportunity to be restored to reality. And reality is my friend, ultimately. It doesn't always feel like it, but when I land there, it's like, oh, right, now I'm safe. And now I'm home. We're in reality. We're in truth.
Well, I think being truthful can be difficult. Let's say between two friends, and it's not an easy thing to open up to somebody, right? I think we can all appreciate that. But and you've done the scary thing where not only have you opened up to your close friend, your lover, your community, you've also publicly shared that you're in recovery from many things, from sex and love addiction as well. And in this memoir specifically, you write that sex and love addictions are more common than we may think and very rarely acknowledged, especially among women. Why do you think that is?
So I had heard of sex addiction, but I thought of it as um, a series of what I would have pictured that as being would be a series of compulsive behaviors. Typically, I would associate it with men,
Mm-hmm.
and I would associate it with pornography addiction or a compulsive use of sex workers, massage parlors. Um, I think that's what I would have associated sex addiction with, or a compulsive promiscuity that's just completely off the rails of like thousands and thousands of partners or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the reason I didn't know to identify myself that way is because that didn't feel like my story. My story has been that from a very early age, and I would say I did this uninterruptedly for 35 years, starting around the age of 14. I would latch into another person, like latch into a partner with the hope that they were going to save me. And I would exchange sex for a sense of security that I could not generate within myself. And because that never works, I mean, like all addictions, the really cunning, baffling, and powerful, as the big book of AA says about addiction. But the really insidious thing about addiction is that nobody would do this stuff if it didn't work. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to numb yourself. You're trying to be able to survive your pain. You're using whatever it is you're using to get out of pain, and it works. So latching myself into somebody, becoming obsessed with somebody, becoming infatuated with somebody, changing and shapeshifting myself into whatever I had to change and shapeshift myself into in order to earn their, what we call in the rooms of recovery, love, attention, validation, and acceptance, right? That was what my job in the world was to become whatever I needed to become so that you would give me love, attention, validation, and acceptance, because I had no sense of that in myself. And so sex became something that I manipulated and used in order to do that. And I think a lot of people do that. And I think a lot of women do that because it's the only way to get to that feeling of security, or to control somebody in order to make them love you, right? That's the idea. Such a innocent concept for something that becomes so sordid. And
Right.
then I would just, because it doesn't last, that high doesn't last, that because those relationships would change, then I would just go find someone else, and then I would find someone else, and then I would find someone else, and then I would find someone else. And I only did that about 40 or 50 times, and and when a friend of mine who was in 12-step recovery for alcohol addiction finally sat me down after watching me do that she had been in my life for 20 years, and said, I keep seeing you hurt yourself in this way. And this looks a lot like sex and love addiction. And there's a room for that. That's when my life began to change, when I was able to apply the 12-step model to these behaviors, what's called behavioral addictions or process addictions. I'm in all the relationship programs in the 12-step empire, like the Al-Anon program that helps you deal with people who are addicts, and Codependence Anonymous, and ACA, I'm in all of them because I need them all, because relationships are where I suffer, and relationships are where I get lost, and relationships are where I check out of taking responsibility for myself.
Well, I think you answered part of this question, but would love to just get more thoughts on it, just because it is a very complicated situation, and no substance addiction, no matter what the substance is simple, or there's no straight path. And I think you have connected this to that fundamental human need to feel loved. Do you think the need to feel good is something, because it's something that you wrote, that Rayya has swore that all she wanted to be was good? And you also talked about how using women as an example, that women are usually groomed by society to want to be the chosen one, right? Like to be chosen for love or for whatever that need is at the time. And you mentioned substances like alcohol. That's something that you can remove with a lot of work, but it's something that you can remove from your life. But love and human connection are essential things that I think we can't really live without them. So how do you navigate that tension? And with that in mind, what does recovery look like for you?
So I'll first say that you can have love and human connection without having sex and romance. So I think one thing that happens is that people have conflated, when we talk about love, we're only talking about this one aspect of love. And our culture glorifies that as the especially for women, as the highest love and the highest attainment without which you will never be okay. And that's not true. There are lots of other different kinds of love. There's family love, and there's agape, and there's love of your friends and fellows, and there's community. Um, there's love of yourself. There's love of your higher power. There's love of life itself. There's all these other expressions of love, and I do believe that we can't live without love. But I don't believe that people cannot live without sex and romance. That's a choice you can make. You can make a decision to say, do I want to expand the heart field of love into sex and romance, or do I want to express love in these other ways? How do I want to belong? And who do I want to connect myself with? I had a friend who was a monk, a Buddhist monk, who somebody asked her once about, what do you think about sex? And she said, well, first of all, you're talking to a celibate. So I might not really be the person. I mean, all you have to do is look to people who have chosen lives of devotional celibacy to see that, like, of course you can live a life of enormous fulfillment without this ingredient, right? And she said, the one thing I've noticed about sex is that you leave a part of yourself with that person, and that person leaves a part of themselves with you. And so just be really mindful about who you want to be doing that with. How much of yourself do you want to leave behind in somebody's essence, and how much of them do you want to have with you forever? Like, just be mindful. And I was never particularly mindful about that. So recovery looks like different things to different people. For me, what recovery looks like is not, my goal is no longer to have a healthy and satisfying sexual and romantic relationship with somebody. That was my goal my entire life. My goal is to have a healthy and satisfying relationship with myself, with my higher power, with everyone around me, and with the world at large, and with my own existence, right? I want to be in good and healthy relationship with all of those things. As for now, that longing has left me. That nothing about that feels attractive to me today, just for today. And the deep connection that I've finally been able to anchor myself in with myself and with my own life is so sacred and precious and satisfying that if somebody were to move into my house, for instance, at this point, it would feel like a home invasion. Like really, I would be like, why are you here? Like, why are you interrupting my beautiful routines and my rituals, and my sacredness and my freedom? The freedom that I have found to move through the world without having to ask anybody's permission, the freedom that I found to be able to be, I think, the truest version of myself that I've ever been, because I'm not shape-shifting for somebody. So if the day should arise when that changes, or when I feel called to be in a more intimate relationship, also my friendships have blossomed. I think, like many women, I poured all of my love and attention into my romantic partner and kind of neglected my beautiful female friendships, that some of which I've had for decades, and I would only see that person once a year, And now I'm like, wait, you were here the whole time and I was totally ignoring you, and you're amazing. So everything in my life has bloomed because I've no longer centered sexual and romantic love as the most important thing. It's much at the periphery of my consciousness at this point. And so everything else has blossomed. So if that should change, I have a sponsor. I work program, I have what's called a sober dating plan, which is for me, this 4-page document that is like best practices for Liz that prevents Liz from abandoning herself into another person. Restrictions, rules, boundaries, all things I never had before in my entire life. One of the things on my sober dating plan is no week-long first dates, right? It's like I'm not going to meet you and then we're going to run away together a week later. Like there's a lot of things that I've worked with my sponsor and my fellows in my program to create that will hopefully keep me from my own most degraded behaviors that take me farthest away from myself and from my safety. But that day isn't today. Just for today, I'm really happy just where I am.
Well, and just for today, we're very happy that you're here with us and you're happy where you are today. And you've been listening to best-selling author Elizabeth Gilbert. Her memoir, All the Way to the River, was released on September 9th. Stay with us after the break.
You're listening to a broadcast of a previously recorded program.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. What if the love of your life suddenly became a danger to your well-being? That's one of the central questions of Elizabeth Gilbert's new memoir, All the Way to the River. Gilbert is a native of Connecticut, and she joins us this hour to discuss her journey towards healing following the death of her late partner, Rayya Elias. So Liz, I have to talk about the title of your book because I think it means so many things, but such an evocative title, All the Way to the River. What does the river represent for you in this book and in your own life?
So the title comes from something that Rayya used to say. She had divided her friendships up based on the map of downtown Manhattan, using it as a sort of geographical like metaphor. And so she called her Fifth Avenue friends, who are right in the center of the map, the people that she was just professional and superficial with. And then her Fourth and Third Avenue friends were sort of like neighbors and business colleagues who she, maybe allowed to know her a little bit better, and she knew them a little bit better, but everybody was still kind of presenting their shiniest persona to the world. And then she said, you get to your Second, Third, and First Avenue friends, and these are people that you've known your whole life who really know you better, and you can let down your hair with them and be really loose and open with them. And then she's like continuing east, like you get to your Alphabet City friends, and those are the people who really know you, like the people, those phone calls in the middle of the night who call when you're having a panic attack. They let you live with them when you were going through your divorce. You went to the abortion clinic with them. You went to court with them. You took the car keys from them when they were drinking too much. Like there's a level of real vulnerability of how you know one another. But then she said, if you're very lucky, you might have one friend over the course of your entire life who will go with you all the way to the river. And in that case, she meant the East River. And she used to say, Liz is my all the way to the river friend. And what she meant by that was that there's not even any boundaries anymore. Like the level of intimacy is so deep and rich. And then when we found out she was dying, we started to call her Death the River. And she would say to me, I want you to walk with me all the way to the river. And I promised her that I would. And that was a very noble promise. But as I say in the book, anybody who's ever walked from Fifth Avenue to the East River in downtown New York knows that it's not always a very nice or safe walk. You go through some pretty shady areas, and then you got to cross that highway, and you've got to find the overpass, and it's like it's not. And then you get to the river, and it's the East River. It's a polluted body of water that's filled with the bodies of gangsters and sunken cars. And what I get to at the book is that intimacy at that level, allowing yourself to be so known. And allowing yourself to know somebody else where you know the gangsters and the cars at the bottom of their river is not for the faint of heart. And indeed, I ended up walking with Rayya all the way to the river, but there were some portions of that journey where I had to peel off in order to save myself. I was with her in the last weeks of her life, and I was with her when she died, but there were a couple months there where I had to get away because she had become a danger to me.
Well, I really I really like that you did that explainer in your book, sort of as for those who may not be familiar with the area. That is, what a great metaphor for life, right? Like we were talking about earlier, where you can only plan so far. Same thing with the route. You can only plan so far, but sometimes your GPS might malfunction or decide that you're turning another way. And oftentimes it's to places that you didn't expect. And I think it feels like Rayya seems to be someone who held up a mirror for you in many ways, in many powerful ways. And in that spiritual moment you described when you felt her voice saying, let everyone find their own path. It's good for them and it's good for you. I couldn't help but think about how many readers turn to you for guidance during their own transitions. Does carrying that reputation as a source of wisdom ever feel heavy or burdensome? Or do you wonder, I'm not that person, but you kind of are in some ways?
Well, I hope that I'm never telling anyone how to live, because that's not healthy for me or for them. And I've certainly learned a lot about that coming into 12-step recovery and working with a sponsor and getting sponsees of my own, how tempting it is to, especially tempting for somebody who has codependent tendencies,
Right.
to think that I know how you should be living, and I don't know. Um, I mean, look at the kind of chaos of my life that I've lived in as evidence of the fact that I should not be telling anybody else how to live. But what I will do, and what I will happily do, and I feel like is kind of one of the things I came here to do, is I'll live my lessons out loud, and I will share with you anything I've learned. Like anything I've learned in my own journey, I can't think of a single reason why I would withhold it. If there's anything that I've picked up that could be helpful to another person, by all means, I will put it out there into the ether.
Liz, it was so wonderful talking with you today. So much. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks, Kat. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for such a brilliant and insightful interview. I really appreciated it.
Well, thank you. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Chloe Wynn. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.